Hi, my name's Marjorie. My parents told everyone they had no choice but to give me up, that I was too much to handle. But the truth? They signed me away like paperwork and bought a house with the check they got for doing it. I spent years thinking I was the broken one, but it turns out I was just the most inconvenient part of their story. Want to know how I gave them back a burden they couldn't sell, silence, or forget? Then keep watching. The table was too quiet for a Wednesday. My brother Wendell kept staring at his plate, like the mashed potatoes were giving him answers. Velma had her arms crossed, like always, ready to defend herself before anyone attacked. The roast on my plate had gone cold, and the silence in the room made it feel colder. Garrett, my father, cleared his throat. "Your mom and I talked." He always said that before doing something permanent. Eloise didn't look at me when she spoke. She just tapped her fingernails against her glass. "There's a place, Marjorie, a facility. They can give you more structure, something better suited for your needs." My fork slipped from my fingers and clanged against the plate. I was 10. I didn't know what more structure meant. I just knew that my name wasn't in the sentence about staying. Garrett folded a manila envelope and pushed it toward me like it was a school report card. "We've made arrangements. It's for the best." No one asked if I wanted to go. No one even tried to pretend they were sad. I waited for someone, anyone, to make eye contact. But Wendell never looked up. Velma pulled her sweater tighter around herself. My mom stood up like she was excusing herself from dinner, not from motherhood, and that was it. We didn't finish the meal. The roast stayed untouched. They left the table first, and I stayed until the kitchen light turned off. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling until I heard footsteps at my door, followed by a soft knock. I didn't answer. Eloise walked in anyway. "It's time." She handed me a plastic grocery bag. "You won't need much. They have clothes there." "My bear?" She paused. "It's better not to get attached." At 3 in the morning, I stepped onto the front porch in socks and sneakers that didn't match. A sedan with faded paint idled in the driveway. A woman in a beige windbreaker leaned against it, flipping through paperwork. The porch light was the only thing left on. I looked back once. No silhouette in the window, no wave. The light clicked off before I even reached the sidewalk. I climbed into the back seat. The woman, her badge said Lynn M., offered me gum. I shook my head. We pulled away from the curb, and the house grew smaller behind us. The same house I had colored pictures in, where I learned to braid my hair, where I scraped my knees and tried to stop the bleeding with paper towels. Gone. Half an hour into the ride, Lynn glanced at me through the mirror. "You okay, sweetheart?" I wasn't sure what okay meant anymore. "Am I still their daughter?" I whispered. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter. "You're a very brave girl, Marjorie." That was the first time someone called me brave. It didn't make me feel better. It just made me feel further away from home. I leaned my head against the window. Outside, everything was dark and empty, like no one in the world was awake but me. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink hard. I just sat there, quiet, still, until sleep pulled me under. Not because I was tired, but because I already knew no one would be waiting when I woke up. When they finally read the card, it wasn't the message that haunted them. It was who left it. I didn't stick around to see anyone find it. I didn't need to. Some truths don't need witnesses. They just need to be left in plain sight. 3 days earlier, I stood outside the Des Moines bus terminal with a letter in my coat pocket and a headache that wouldn't let go. The letter hadn't been meant for me. It was addressed to family and friends of Eloise Holloway, postmarked from Velma's address, forwarded to a P.O. box I hadn't touched in months. I almost tossed it, but I opened it, just in case, and "You are warmly invited to celebrate the 80th birthday of our beloved Eloise Holloway. Join us for a garden luncheon and family tribute." Beloved. That word stuck with me more than the rest. The sky that morning was overcast, not dramatic or ominous, just indifferent. Kind of like my family. I walked the few blocks to their house, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes. Needed to know if it had all really happened, or if I had made it worse in my mind over the years. There it was. Same white siding, same wind chimes on the porch. But now the yard was littered with balloons, folding chairs, and people I hadn't seen since I was a child. Laughing, hugging, pouring lemonade like nothing in this world had ever gone wrong. I stood across the street for a while before crossing. A neighbor spotted me and waved. "You lost, hun." Catering's around back. Before I could answer, another woman stepped forward, smiling politely. "Oh, are you with the event staff?" I looked at her, square in the face. "No, I'm the ghost no one invited." She blinked. I walked past her, slow and steady. Garrett was sitting in a lawn chair by the rose bushes, holding court. People came by to shake his hand, to tell him what a strong man he was. I saw Wendell refill his lemonade. Velma was busy directing the playlist, making sure the string lights were just right. Not once did any of them look toward the street. I didn't walk into the yard. I didn't raise my voice or wave my arms. Instead, I stayed in the blind spot they built over decades, where I was safest and most dangerous. I drifted around to the back, staying on the outer path, careful not to step on the freshly mowed grass. On the patio was a slideshow playing on a rented projector. Childhood photos, mostly black and white. Velma in pigtails, Wendell holding a baseball glove, Garrett in his work uniform. No pictures of me. Not a single one. Not even the one from the Christmas I broke my wrist helping Mom carry firewood. Not the one where I stood next to the birthday cake they claimed I didn't need that year. I wasn't just forgotten. I had been cut out. I stared through the window for a long minute, letting the laughter from inside fill the air around me. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out the card. Simple, white, handwritten. "Some things don't die. You just stopped mentioning them." I slipped it under a potted fern by the back steps. Then I turned and walked back the way I came. Not because it hurt too much to stay, but because they didn't earn the right to see how much it still hurt. As I walked away, a man at the edge of the yard caught my eye. He squinted, then tilted his head. "Wait. Marjorie?" I didn't answer. He called after me again, louder this time. I kept walking. I reached the sidewalk, exhaled through my nose, and adjusted the strap of my purse. It was heavier than when I arrived somehow. Maybe that's what truth does. It weighs more when it's carried alone. By the time I reached the corner, the music faded behind me. A cover of "You Are My Sunshine" played on acoustic guitar. I hadn't heard that song since Eloise hummed it while packing my bag the night she told me I was too much for their life. It didn't make me nostalgic. It made me tired. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just left and smiled, knowing they'd find the card after the cake was cut. The next morning, I caught the early bus back to Omaha. My body stayed upright, but my mind wandered in places I hadn't let it touch for years. Every time the tires hummed against the highway, it felt like a stitch pulling loose in a memory I hadn't sewn shut properly. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I stopped by the corner diner across from the Greyhound station. Coffee there tasted like burnt regret, but the server always remembered my name, and that kind of consistency was rare currency in my world. Back at my room above the boarding house, there was a stack of mail waiting inside the door. Junk mostly, coupons, a dentist flyer, a postcard from some church I'd never joined. But one envelope stood out. No return address. The handwriting was stiff, like it came from someone who didn't write much anymore. Inside was a short note. "I kept this. I didn't know if you'd want it. Florence Maddox." Tucked behind the note was a scan of a document. Yellowed, stamped, signed in two hands, I recognized immediately. Garrett Holloway, Eloise Granger Holloway. Parental consent form. Termination of guardianship. Legal custody transferred to the state of Iowa. I held the page closer, my eyes scanning every detail. There was a handwritten receipt attached. Amount disbursed, $4,200. Below it, the date, just 5 days before the deed transfer on their new house. They didn't just let me go. They sold me. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, letting the room go quiet around me. The radiator knocked. A siren echoed down the block. But all I could hear was Eloise's voice that night by the door. "It's better not to get attached." I thought I was the problem. The high-maintenance child. Too sensitive, too much. Turns out I was just inconvenient and profitable. Later that afternoon, I went to the public library. I asked to use the archive computer and pulled up county records. It took less than 10 minutes to find it. A second mortgage issued to Garrett Holloway 6 days after my placement. The number matched. There it was in black and white. I wasn't unwanted. I was liquidated. That night, lying in bed with the lights off, I stared at the ceiling, remembering the bunk beds at the group home. Some girls cried themselves to sleep. Some got care packages. I never got either. I just folded into myself and learned to take up less space. It made me less of a target. I used to believe they gave me up because they didn't know what else to do, that maybe they were desperate, overwhelmed, afraid. But the truth was much simpler. They chose comfort over me, and for the first time in years, I wasn't crushed by that realization. I was clear-headed. The next morning, I dressed deliberately. Slacks, button-down shirt, pulled my hair back. No emotion, no softness. I took the train to the legal district and spent 3 hours at the law library. Downloaded every precedent I could find on post-placement fraud, financial benefit tied to wardship transfers, and violations of state subsidy disclosures. I took notes, bookmarked files, highlighted language, statute by statute. The librarian leaned over once and asked, "You working on a case?" I looked her in the eye. "Not yet, but I'm getting ready." That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror with the file from Florence in one hand and a notepad in the other. "I thought they were just done with me," I whispered to my own reflection. But they weren't. They cashed in on me. I tore the page from my notepad and wrote one sentence across it. They monetized my silence. Then I flipped it over and added, "Let's see how much noise I can make." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But something inside me shifted, just slightly enough to tip the scales back in my favor. And in that record, she wouldn't need to raise her voice, only show the receipt. The invitation to the will reading came through email, impersonal, like a subscription renewal notice. The sender was the family attorney's office. Subject line, "Reading of estate, Eloise Holloway." The date and time were firm. No condolences, just a note saying I was named as a legal party with interest. I showed up 10 minutes early, not to prove a point, just because I didn't want anyone saying I came in late looking for attention. The firm was downtown, a bland office building with a single potted plant by the elevator that hadn't been watered in weeks. When I entered the conference room, they were already seated. Velma, with her blazer buttoned too tight, pretended to check her phone. Wendell offered me a brief nod, the kind you'd give someone you sort of recognized from the DMV. Garrett sat hunched at the far end of the table, hands folded, eyes cloudy. The attorney cleared his throat and opened a manila folder. No preamble, no acknowledgement that I hadn't seen any of them in decades. Just the facts. To my daughter Velma and my son Wendell, I leave the estate, including the primary residence and remaining financial assets. To Marjorie Blythe, formerly under our guardianship until 1979, no provision shall be made. There it was. Not just rejection, legal erasure, no gasp, no apology, no confusion. Just paper, printed and signed. I wasn't a person to them. I was a clause. Velma looked toward the window. Garrett exhaled, like he was relieved it was done. Wendell dropped his gaze to his lap. No one said my name. Afterward, as everyone rose to leave, Lorraine lingered by the door. She looked unsure, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Finally, she caught up to me as I was zipping my coat. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. I turned toward her, waiting. "Were you adopted or something?" I didn't flinch. No, I said. I was returned. Her mouth opened like she wanted to respond, but nothing came out. She looked away, and in that silence, I saw it. The beginning of doubt. The question she hadn't been allowed to ask until now. Maybe it was the first time she realized adults don't always tell the truth. I stepped past her without another word. Later that week, I sat in my apartment and wrote a letter to the firm. Short, precise. I do not contest the contents of the will. I do, however, reserve the right to publicly correct any omissions, factual or otherwise, through any legal or journalistic means I deem appropriate. I mailed it certified. 3 days later, Velma called. I don't understand what you think this is going to accomplish, she snapped. It's not like you were ever really part of this family. I paused, holding the phone away from my ear for a second to breathe. Then, calmly, that's exactly the part I plan to clarify, for anyone else who's ever wondered. You're embarrassing yourself, she hissed. I let that sit. No, I'm just done letting you rewrite the past like I never existed. You always had a flair for the dramatic, and you always had a knack for pretending things were clean when they were just hidden. She hung up. That night, I retrieved the file from Florence, the parental surrender form, the payout stub, the faded date stamps. I slid them into a folder labeled Narrative Control. I didn't need to scream. I just needed to keep the facts straight. People like Velma thrived in silence, in quiet edits and missing photos. But I didn't owe her the comfort of being forgotten anymore. The truth doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to outlast the lie. So she decided to make her truth permanent, even if no one asked for it. 2 mornings after the letter to Velma was sent, I got a call from the hospital. Mrs. Holloway's condition is declining, the nurse said. We were told you were listed as emergency contact, since no one else is available. I didn't ask why I was the fallback. I already knew. They only remembered me when something needed signing. It was cloudy when I pulled into the hospital's rear parking lot. The kind of day where light can't decide if it wants to stay or go. I checked in, walked the familiar halls, and followed the quiet beeping toward the palliative wing. Eloise was alone. No flowers, no framed photos. Just her and the sound of machines doing what her body could no longer manage on its own. She turned her head slightly when I entered. Her eyes didn't widen. No surprise. Just the tired recognition of someone who knew the end wasn't far. You came, she whispered, as though that fact carried weight. I was called, I replied, pulling the chair closer. I didn't reach for her hand. She didn't offer it. After a long silence, she asked, Did it hurt that much? I blinked, unsure if she meant my absence or her own choices. Eloise sighed. I did what I thought was best, for the others. I kept my voice steady. And for me? She didn't answer, just turned her face toward the ceiling tiles, like she might find her justification hidden up there. For 10 minutes, we sat with nothing between us but a history we never said aloud. Then she drifted off. A nurse entered softly. She wanted you to have this, she said, handing me a small metal tin. Told me it was important. Said you'd know what to do with it. I didn't open it right away. I waited until I was outside, sitting in my car, hands still shaking despite the stillness of the moment. Inside was a folded birth certificate, creased, weathered. Beneath it, the surrender form again, only this time with a signature that looked shakier than the version I'd already seen. And under that, a letter. Unsent. Addressed to me. The paper had browned at the edges. The handwriting wobbled, like it had been written through tears. Or tremors. You cried just like I did when I was young. I couldn't watch it again. It brought too much back. I wish you could understand that. That was it. No apology, no, I was wrong. Just one woman's attempt to justify another girl's pain through the mirror of her own. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the tin. Not because I forgave her, but because some things are too heavy to hold and too cruel to throw away. That afternoon, I drove out to the storage unit I hadn't visited in years. It was still there, tucked behind a strip mall and a discount tire place, smelling faintly of old insulation and rubber. Inside, I unlocked a plastic container labeled Keep, court records, medical papers, faded Polaroids with me cropped out or scribbled over, tax filings that never listed me as a dependent past 79. I set the tin gently in the center and closed the lid. Then I placed it inside a fireproof metal box I bought after my divorce. On the outside, a label I printed that morning. Truth, not for court, for history. If they had wanted to bury me, they should have destroyed the paperwork. As I locked the unit and walked back to my car, I didn't feel triumphant, just settled. Like some invisible piece had clicked into place, not because the past was fixed, but because I'd finally drawn the border around it myself. People think closure is about forgiveness. It isn't. It's about ownership. And for the first time in my life, I owned the story, even the parts that broke me. I didn't tell anyone I left that storage unit. I just drove. No music, no phone calls. I let the silence hold space around me. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun had dipped low behind the buildings, throwing long shadows across the street. I was putting my keys down when the phone rang, the kind of ring that somehow sounded urgent before I even looked at the screen. It was Lorraine. Her voice cracked before she finished the first sentence. "It's Grandpa. He collapsed. The ambulance took him to County General." "Where's Velma?" I asked, already reaching for my coat. "She flew to Portland for some conference. Wendell said he doesn't want to get involved." "Of course he didn't." "What do they need from me?" I said, though I already knew. "They need someone to sign the paperwork, for next steps. And you're the only one legally eligible now." I didn't answer, not right away. "It's just, he keeps asking for someone. I think he's scared." I closed my eyes. Of course it came back to me, the one they filed away. I hung up gently and slid my bag onto my shoulder, already thinking through what I'd need. I wasn't going there for comfort. I was going because someone had to show up, just like no one had for me. By the time I arrived, the hospital halls smelled like lemon cleaner and resignation. Nurses nodded politely. One of them guided me through double doors into a smaller unit where the lights were dimmed and the voices hushed. Garrett was in a recliner, hooked to monitors, eyes closed. His chest rose and fell in uneven patterns. He looked smaller than I remembered. Less like the man who once told me, "Quiet girls get kept longer," and more like a shell waiting to be handled. A nurse appeared with a clipboard. "You're Ms. Blythe?" I nodded. "You're listed as the only adult child not formally waived of medical proxy. We need consent to proceed with care options, long-term planning." She handed me a pen. Funny, how the weight of a signature could suddenly flip a lifetime upside down. I signed. The nurse gave me a look, soft but measured. "He may not have much time." "He's had more than enough," I said, setting the clipboard down. I walked out without looking back. The next morning, I met with Tamsin Greer in her downtown office. She'd been my quiet advisor for years, someone who never pried, only listened and acted when asked. I handed her a stack of files, photocopies of the custody transfer, state subsidy breakdowns, timeline overlays of the second mortgage. She flipped through the pages, eyes sharp. "You're not doing this to save him, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm doing it so the system has to look at what they let him do. To me, and probably others." She nodded slowly. "You don't have to provide care." "I know," I said, "but I can control what happens next." She tapped a few keys on her laptop, then looked up. "If we file for temporary guardianship, we can trigger a review of his finances, of his ethics as a past guardian." "And Velma? She won't be happy." I let out a quiet breath. That's not my concern. 3 days later, we filed. Court records updated. Judge approved temporary oversight. A financial review was ordered. Quietly, but officially. Velma and Wendell were served notices. The calls came within hours. Velma's voice was sharp, nearly shrill. "What are you trying to do, Marjorie? He's dying." No, I said calmly. He's finally being held accountable. You're dragging this family through the mud. You already buried me in it. I'm just making sure someone checks the foundation. She cursed, then hung up. I didn't feel satisfied, but I felt even. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote in the same corner I had written years ago. They filed me away. I filed them back. Not out of spite, but because no one should be forced to disappear quietly, and the silence was about to collapse under the weight of everything they'd buried. The local newsletter came out every other Tuesday. I hadn't subscribed in years, but somehow a copy found its way into my mailbox that morning. Folded neatly, like it hadn't been tampered with. It had no name on the byline, but the title stood out like a bruise on pale skin. The Daughter Who Disappeared. The story didn't mention me by name. It didn't have to. The timeline was clear. 1979. The financial transaction. The quiet removal of a child under the guise of what's best for the family. The closing line read, "Some people were buried alive, not to die, but to be forgotten." The phones in that house must have lit up like Christmas. I didn't write it, but I knew who did. A former social worker's niece, now a journalist, had reached out a few months ago asking vague questions about long-closed guardianship cases. I gave her nothing, but maybe the paper trail spoke louder than I ever could. By midday, people were whispering at the grocery store. I caught a woman near the apples muttering, "You think it's about the Holloways?" The man beside her didn't answer, just shook his head slowly, like he didn't want to be caught saying what he already knew. 3 days later, I was invited, unofficially, to the church service honoring Eloise. I wasn't sure why I went. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the sick need to witness how they'd package her legacy now that she wasn't around to defend it. The foyer was decorated with soft lavender cloth, candles in glass vases, and a folding table covered with framed photographs. A slideshow ran silently in the background. I stood at the edge of the room until I spotted it. The photo. It was from 1980. Supposed to be the last full family picture before Velma's college graduation. Garrett sat in the middle, Velma on one side, Wendell on the other. There was a gap, noticeable, awkward. And then I saw it. A jagged edge, where a face had been cut out, literally removed with scissors. No digital editing, no Photoshop, just old-school erasure with intent. They hadn't even replaced me with someone. They just edited me out. I walked closer. A few people stepped aside, murmuring. No one stopped me. I stared at that picture and didn't blink. If they erased me from their past, I said out loud, not caring who heard, I'll write myself into their future. I didn't touch the photo. I didn't tear it or frame it. I just took a picture with my phone and walked away. That was the evidence. That was enough. Later that evening, while I was finishing dishes, the phone rang. Velma. I let it ring twice before answering. "What did you do?" she barked. Her voice was taut, brittle, like a rubber band stretched too far. "I didn't do anything," I said, drying my hands on a dish towel. "But it sounds like the truth finally did." "This is harassment. You think you can just drag this family through the mud with these lies?" "Velma, if it's a lie, why does it hurt so much?" There was silence on her end, the kind that only follows being cornered. "You think you're clever," she spat, "but you're just bitter." "Maybe," I said evenly, "but I've got paperwork to back up every word. You can sue over slander, Velma, but not over the truth." She cursed and hung up. I didn't flinch. Instead, I sat down and wrote in my notebook. Again, same black pen, same top right corner. They thought silence protected them, but now silence speaks louder than I ever could. Let them scramble. Let them make calls. Let them spin a story. The thing about silence is, once it cracks, it echoes. But when a door closes on the past, sometimes a window opens towards something softer. The check cleared on a Tuesday. It wasn't flashy. No announcement. No parade. Just a quiet confirmation from the title office that the house at 204 Briar Lane, the same one my parents bought after signing me away, was now legally mine. I didn't tell anyone, didn't need to. A week later, I met Anihi Delgado outside the front porch. She was holding a toddler on her hip, her other hand resting protectively on the shoulder of a shy boy with curls. Her eyes darted toward the front window, then back to me. "I'm not sure what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," I told her, sliding the key across the porch railing. "It's yours, $1 a month, no catches." She blinked, unsure if I was joking. "I don't want it to be a tomb," I added, watching her son lean toward the flower bed. "I want it to be a home again." She hesitated for just a moment before accepting the key, her fingers trembling slightly. I nodded once, stepped off the porch, and didn't look back. I hadn't walked past that mailbox in years. And now, not only had I bought the house they funded with my disappearance, I'd given it to someone who reminded me of the version of myself I never got to be. Hopeful, fragile, still believing a house could keep you safe. That Friday, I was sitting on my porch, sipping weak tea, when the nurse rolled Garrett up to the edge of my walkway. His chair clicked against the uneven pavement, wheels squeaking softly. He didn't recognize me at first. Then, slowly, something registered. His eyes narrowed. Not with anger, but with a searching sort of fatigue. "You live across from your own father," he said, "and won't even come say hello?" I didn't shift, just placed my cup down and answered. "I tried to once. No one listened." He stared at me. "I learned silence speaks louder here," I added. He looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly in his lap. No arguments, no excuses, just stillness. A moment passed where I thought he might ask to come in. He didn't. Instead, his chin began to quiver. Tears formed at the corners of his eyes, but never fell. I stayed seated. He waited. I didn't invite him. He didn't beg. And when the nurse began to wheel him back down the driveway, I stood slowly, walked to the door, and closed it gently behind me. Not with malice, not with rage, just closure. The next morning, I stepped out onto the porch and saw Anahi and her son planting tulip bulbs along the edge of the yard. She smiled when she saw me, brushing hair from her face with dirt-smudged fingers. The boy waved. I waved back. A few minutes later, Lorraine walked up the sidewalk, holding a manila envelope. She paused at my gate, then slipped it into my mailbox without saying a word. I waited until she disappeared around the corner before opening it. Inside was a letter. "You didn't just reclaim your story, you rewrote ours too." No signature, but I knew the handwriting. I stood there for a long time, envelope in hand, sun warming my face. Then I walked back inside, unlocked the fireproof box, and placed it alongside the old court records, letters, photos, and the worn-out tin from the hospital. I closed the lid with both hands. "It's not about justice anymore," I whispered. "It's about ending the cycle." And I meant it. The lid clicked shut, soft but final. It was early evening by then, the kind of time when the sky couldn't decide whether it wanted to hold on to the sun or let it go. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the letter one more time before placing it under the stack of envelopes beside the fruit bowl. No return address, no name, but I knew it was Lorraine. Her handwriting carried the kind of weight that comes when a young person tries to be careful with their words, not out of fear, but out of hope. "You didn't just reclaim your story, you rewrote ours too." There was more on the back, smaller script, like she'd written it without planning to, as if the truth just kept spilling out. "They raised us to believe pain was best ignored, that pretending meant healing. You made it real. That's why I believe you. If no one ever apologized, I'm sorry. Not for what happened, but for not realizing it sooner." I folded the letter and sat with it resting in my lap. I didn't cry. There was no dramatic music playing in my head, no swelling of emotions. Just a quiet recognition of something I hadn't even known I was waiting to hear. An acknowledgement that didn't come with excuses, no justifications, no signature trying to validate itself, only the kind of apology that lands when it has no reason to. And that's why it matters. The following Tuesday, I stopped by the community center just after lunch. Miss Helen, the receptionist with the southern drawl and quick hands, greeted me with her usual smile. "You here for the craft fair?" she asked. "Not today," I said, holding out a manila folder. She looked at it, then at me. "You need a copy machine?" "No, I'm here to donate something." I asked to speak to the director. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man who had probably spent his life listening to other people's broken things. I handed him the folder. Inside were my updated estate papers and a check for $50,000. "I'd like to set up a grant," I said, "for women who've been discarded, who were called difficult, dramatic, too much, or not enough." He flipped through the documents slowly. "What would you like it called?" "The Blythe Grant, for women discarded but not done." He smiled, but didn't say anything. I added, "This isn't about rewriting history. It's about making sure the next woman doesn't drown in it." As I stood to leave, I caught the eye of a young woman in the lobby. She had a stroller with a sleeping infant and a backpack that looked like it had survived one too many winters. Our eyes met for only a second, but she nodded. I nodded back. No words exchanged. None needed. Later that week, on a bright Saturday morning, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea. The house across the street, mine once, then theirs, now Anahi's, looked alive again. The tulips were blooming along the fence. The front windows were open. I could hear soft laughter coming from inside. Lorraine showed up just after 10. She didn't text. She never did. She just started appearing more and more, like water seeping through a cracked foundation, not to destroy, but to soften. She sat beside me, her legs pulled up under her. We didn't talk for a while. Eventually, she asked, "Do you ever wonder what it might have been like if they'd made a different choice?" I took a long sip before answering. "No," I said. "I wonder who I would have become if I'd waited for them to." She didn't say anything back, just reached down and plucked a petal from a tulip near her foot. A few minutes passed. Then, softly, she said, "You're not a burden, Aunt Marjorie." I looked out at the garden, where things had started to grow again. "Not anymore," I said. "Not to me." We sat in the silence, not needing to fill it. And I realized then that some things we don't repair. Not because we can't, but because we've learned how to live differently without them. She wasn't healed, she wasn't whole, but she was finally her own. Before we close this chapter, let me share something with you. Just one thought, from someone who has carried silence longer than most people carry names. I used to believe that healing meant things going back to how they were. That one day, someone would say sorry, and all the broken pieces would fit together again like a puzzle. But now I know, healing isn't about fixing what happened, it's about owning it, so it no longer owns you. Sometimes the justice we seek won't come from courtrooms or apologies. It will come from choosing not to pass the same wound to someone else. Sometimes the win is not revenge, it's peace. If you've ever felt like the one they forgot, the one left out of the photo, the will, or even the dinner table, this story is for you. You are not invisible. You were never the burden. And your silence? It deserves to be broken in your own way, in your own time. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been erased from your own story, by your family, by your history, or by someone who said they loved you? If so, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story, your thoughts, or even your silence, because here, you matter. And if you didn't like the video, tell me why. I'm listening. Maybe someone else needs to hear your version too. If this story touched you, helped you breathe a little deeper, or made you feel just a bit more seen, please consider subscribing to the channel. There's more to come, more voices, more stories, more truth. Click that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. Because around here, the stories don't just get told, they get reclaimed. Hi there, I'm Avon. At Christmas, My sister stood up, clinked her glass, and said, "We voted and cut you off." Everyone nodded, smiled, like it was nothing. But the part no one saw? The years they drained my bank account behind closed doors. The therapy I paid for. The wedding I funded. The hospital scare that turned out to be a lie. And just when I finally walked away, they came back, asking for help. How did I go from being not family to being their only lifeline? You ever wonder what happens when you stop being the family fixer and start being the one who says enough? Let me show you. I showed up with a bottle of Cabernet, one of the nice ones from my stash. I even wrapped it with a bow like an idiot, like I believed this year would be different. The porch light at Rosen's place flickered once as I rang the bell. The smell of pine and cinnamon hit me as the door creaked open, and Mom's voice carried through the hallway. "Avon's here," she sang out, fake cheer dripping off every syllable. Inside, the house looked like a Hallmark card. Warm lights, crackling fire, the whole thing. Neva was by the tree, shaking a box with her name on it. My father didn't bother getting up from the recliner. Rosine smiled like we were on camera. "You're early," she said. "Must be nice having no kids and no real responsibilities." I smiled politely and placed the wine on the table. "Better early than dramatic," I said, trying to sound playful, but she didn't laugh. Dinner was already set. Carved ham, roasted vegetables, perfectly folded napkins. Rosen always knew how to stage a picture-perfect disaster. I took my seat near the end of the table. Small talk buzzed like a bad radio station. Static, tension, half-hearted chuckles. No one asked how I'd been. No one mentioned my promotion last quarter. It was clear they were just waiting for something. And then it happened. Rosine stood up, wineglass in hand, wearing that lipstick she only used when she wanted to win. "Before we cut the pie," she said, "I think it's time we got honest." I looked up. My stomach turned before she even finished the sentence. She glanced around the table like a smug senator. "We voted, and we've decided you're no longer part of this family." I blinked. At first, I thought I misheard her, or maybe she was joking. But Mom nodded in agreement. "It was bound to happen sooner or later," she said, buttering her roll. Cale stared at his plate, silent. Tolliver clinked his fork against his wineglass. "It's for your own good." Neva giggled. She thought it was a game. And my dad? He didn't even meet my eyes. Just shifted in his chair and muttered, "This kind of tension isn't healthy." I felt like I had left my body. Their words didn't pierce me like knives. It was colder than that, like standing outside in a storm with no coat, no one coming to let you in. I stayed quiet for a moment, forcing myself to breathe. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a thick folder. Their laughter stopped. The sound it made when I set it on the table was sharp. Paper meeting wood, with a dull thump that cut deeper than any curse. "What's that?" Rosine asked, the smirk twitching at the corners of her mouth. I leaned back. "Since we're being honest, I figured I'd come prepared." She grabbed it like she expected confetti to fly out. Her fingers flipped through the pages, one by one. The smile drained from her face. Bank transfers. Receipts. Email screenshots. A list of every time they called, texted, begged. A timeline that screamed what I'd swallowed for years. Then she hit page 23. A hotel bill from Charleston. 2 nights. 1 room. Signed with her name and someone else's. Lena. She shoved the folder away like it was covered in filth. "You psychopath," she hissed. "You've been spying?" I didn't flinch. "Number I've been documenting. There's a difference." Cale pulled the folder toward him, started reading. His mouth moved, but no words came out. My mother finally said, "How dare you weaponize your help like this?" I looked at her, calm now, colder than I'd ever felt. "You called it help, but to you, I was an ATM, a therapist, a guilt sponge." I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I held my ground. "You said I wasn't family?" I scanned the faces around the table. "Then maybe you won't need your fallback anymore." No one spoke. Rosine's glass tilted in her hand. Neva asked if we were still playing the game. I walked to the door, grabbing my coat. No tears, no begging, no second chances. Just me, and the storm I finally let them feel. Thunder rumbled in the distance as I stepped outside, the cold air hitting harder than I expected. The door didn't slam behind me. It clicked shut, almost polite, like even the house was too tired to argue. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Let them sit in the silence they carved. The door clicked shut behind me, but their voices bled through the walls. I didn't stop walking, not down the steps, not across the yard. My boots crunched the frost-covered grass like it owed me something. I made it halfway to the street when I heard her. "You think you're better than us?" Rosen's voice, shrill and shaking. "That folder proves you're just obsessive. Sick." I didn't turn around, but I heard the folder hit the wall inside, pages scattering like fire and dry grass. "You're a damn parasite, Avon!" she screamed. Then silence. Then Cale. "Who the hell is Lena?" That stopped me. I turned just slightly, enough to see him standing near the dining room window, the folder in his hand now. His eyes weren't just scanning. They were searching, digging. "Don't do this here," Rosen snapped, but her voice had lost its edge. I said, "Who is Lena?" Cale didn't shout. He never had to. His voice just dropped low and steady, like a threat with a tie on. My mother stood up suddenly. "This isn't the time or the place." "The hell it isn't," Cale shot back. "You all wanted honesty. You all clapped. Now we're being honest." I leaned against the mailbox and listened as my sister's perfect night unraveled. "She's a friend," Rosine muttered. Cale read another line aloud. "3 nights, Ocean View Suite, Charleston, signed under your joint account, Rosine Adams and Lena Quinn." "A friend, huh?" "She was helping me with a project." "Stop! Just stop!" His voice broke, just enough for me to hear the betrayal sink in. "You lied to me, and you lied to her." I didn't need to watch the rest. I knew that tone. It was the sound of a marriage unraveling in real time. No fireworks, just the quiet crack of trust splitting open. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, fingers trembling. Not from the cold. A new voicemail, unknown number. I pressed play. "Ms. Adams, this is Ewan from Marlowe and Fisher. Your father asked me to reach out regarding the family trust. He said you recently revoked certain authorizations. He'd like to discuss fallback options." I hung up. Another call came through immediately, same number. "Ms. Adams," Ewan said again when I answered. "Sorry to catch you like this. Your father insisted I contact you. He's under the impression that you're still listed on several fallback clauses as power of attorney." "Not anymore," I replied flatly. "I signed off. It was finalized." "Well," Ewan continued, "he claims that unless you manually update Clause 14B through a separate filing, some assets still default through you. He's asking for a meeting." I laughed. A short, sharp exhale that wasn't amused in the slightest. "Tell him I don't hold that power anymore, and even if I did, I wouldn't lift a finger." "Understood," he said. "Would you like us to notify him in writing?" "No," I said. "Let him stew." I ended the call and stared at the quiet street. A few houses down, someone had one of those plastic reindeer sets lit up. The red nose blinked on and off like it was mocking me. Behind me, the house had gone still again. Not peaceful, just stunned. I took one last look and then walked. Not because I needed air, because staying would have meant seeing their faces after the truth scorched through their lies, and I'd already spent a lifetime swallowing ash. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My breath came even, and I knew, as sure as I knew my name, that they didn't break me tonight. They just proved me right. I didn't have a destination, just distance. Distance from that house, from them, from the wreckage of what used to pass for family. I kept walking until the cold sobered the last of the adrenaline, until the sting in my chest dulled to something I could carry. Then I got in the car, started driving, not toward anything, just away. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove without thinking, past neighborhoods still glowing with lights, through old streets where the pavement cracked in the same places it always had. My tires eventually found their way to the gravel shoulder by the lake, Dad's favorite spot back when I was too young to understand what peace actually meant. The water looked like glass under the moonlight. Not a ripple, not a breeze. Just stillness. I cut the engine and let the silence settle around me like a second skin. I used to come here when I needed clarity, before job deadlines and overdraft notices, before they learned I could be counted on for everything, and punished for the same reason. I leaned back in the driver's seat and stared at the black expanse ahead. The cold crept in through the cracked window, but I didn't roll it up. My mind didn't drift far before it landed right back on them. Not tonight, not Christmas, but every single time they asked, and I said yes. There was the time Dad called at 6:12 a.m. "Just a little help, honey. The dental work wasn't covered after all." He said it like I'd offered first. Then came Mom's bill for a card I didn't open, for items I'd never seen. "Just this once," she'd whispered, like it was a secret between friends. Rosen's emergency therapy turned out to be energy healing with a life coach in California. I wired the money without asking, thinking maybe it was real. Maybe she really was in trouble. Then came the tuition fees for Neva. "We wouldn't ask," Senna said over the phone, "but the scholarship didn't come through, and you know how tight things are." No one offered to pay anything back. No one ever asked if I could afford it. The gratitude when it came was hollow, wrapped in guilt and expectation. "Only you can help. You're the smart one. You have a good job, we don't." It always ended the same way, with my bank account lighter, my breath shorter, and my silence mistaken for consent. Once, at a birthday party for Neva, I brought a book as a gift, something I'd loved as a child. Rosine looked at it, then at me, and muttered, "I guess we all give what we can." They used to tell me I was the backbone of the family. I didn't realize they meant the one carrying all the weight until I couldn't stand upright anymore. I blinked, snapping back to the present, still gripping the steering wheel with both hands. My phone lit up again. This time it was a memory, 3 years ago. A photo of Dad in a hospital bed, looking pitiful and pale. The caption from Mom read, "We're at the ER. Don't know how long he has. Please come." I remembered flying home that day, canceling meetings, moving a project deadline, rushing straight from the airport to the hospital in heels. I'd expected machines, beeping monitors, maybe an IV. Instead, I found him watching a football game and complaining about the soup being cold. "Oh, they were just being cautious," Mom said with a wave of her hand. "Better safe than sorry, right?" Safe. Sure. I remember sitting in the waiting room afterward, staring at the vending machine and realizing that my emergency was never really their emergency. I was the emergency contact, the fixer, the backup plan, not the daughter, never the daughter. I turned off my phone and stepped out of the car, walking down the worn path to the edge of the lake. The wind cut across the water, numbing my face. I didn't care. For the first time all night, I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just done. "They never needed me," I whispered into the dark. "They needed what I could give." And I gave too much. 3 days passed like breath held too long. I barely left my apartment, except to walk the dog and pretend normalcy still lived in my building. Asheville had turned bitterly cold, the kind that cracked your skin and crept into your bones, even when wrapped in wool. The lake hadn't offered answers, but at least it hadn't asked anything of me. Then Senna texted, "Let's meet, just us, no pressure." I stared at the message longer than I should have. My first instinct was to delete it. My second was to ask, "What do you want now?" But curiosity, fool that it is, won. I chose a public place, a tiny cafe tucked on the quieter end of downtown. No risk of a scene, no audience from family. Just 2 sisters playing pretend in a setting too cozy for confrontation. She was already there when I arrived, bundled in a cream coat, hands around a latte that had lost its steam. She looked up, eyes soft. Too soft. I'm glad you came, she said, her voice smaller than I remembered. I sat across from her without taking off my scarf. Let's not waste time. Senna smiled tightly. Okay. Look, about Christmas. That wasn't what it looked like. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? Did someone hack your voice and make you say I wasn't family? She flinched, just slightly. It was heat of the moment. People were emotional. Rosin was pushing hard, and you went along with it, I finished. Senna didn't deny it. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. My stomach turned. What is that? I asked, not bothering to hide the edge in my voice. She slid it across the table. It's paperwork, legal stuff, power of attorney documents. Dad wants to reinstate you. We figured maybe if we handled this first, we could talk easier. I didn't touch it. So this is what you meant by no pressure? I said, voice flat. Avon, we're all tired, she whispered. You've always been the capable one. You understand how these things work. We're scared. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. You don't get to cut me out and then put me back in when it's convenient. Senna looked away. It's not like that. I pushed the envelope back toward her. It's exactly like that. You all clapped when Rosin made her little speech. You toasted to my absence. And now, what? You're here because Dad's scared of losing control of the trust fund? She didn't answer. I'm not your legal shield anymore, I said, standing, and I'm definitely not your emotional one. I left her sitting there, staring at the untouched folder, latte, now completely cold. That night, I couldn't sleep. My phone buzzed once. It was a message from Kale. I owe you an apology. I saw what Rosin was doing for years, and I said nothing. I told myself staying quiet was neutral. It wasn't. It made it worse. Another message followed. You weren't crazy. You were just alone. I stared at the screen, stunned. Kale had always been silent, detached. Switzerland in every family feud. But now, this? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Thank you. I typed it, then deleted it. I locked my phone and lay there, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling, mind running loops. The silence in the room felt louder after Kale's messages. And just as I was starting to make sense of that shift, the screen lit up again. The sun wasn't even up when my phone lit up again. Rosin. No greeting, no punctuation, just, you've gone too far. If something happens to Mom or Dad, it's on you. I stared at the screen for a full minute, waiting for something else. Context, clarification, even a fake apology. Nothing came. Just that one line. Threat dressed as concern. A sentence so sharp it could slit guilt wide open if I let it. I didn't reply. Instead, I padded into the kitchen, flipped on the light, and poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted like metal. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from the pressure building just under my skin. By the time I placed the mug on the table, a hairline crack had already formed in the ceramic. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted a reset button. They wanted the version of me that shut up and paid up, that smiled through insults, that kept peace by erasing myself. But I was no longer that version. By 9 a.m., I'd typed out a message to the family group chat 5 different ways, deleted every draft. None of them felt like enough. Until I hit record. My voice didn't shake this time. I am not your villain, I said. I am your consequence. I let that sit for a second before continuing. For years, I stayed silent because I thought keeping the family together mattered more than telling the truth. I absorbed the jabs, the manipulation, the financial sinkhole you all made out of me. I justified it in my head, told myself you were struggling, but I see it now. You weren't struggling, you were feeding off me. I paused. I won't play the scapegoat anymore, and if you try to smear me, threaten me, or twist this back on me, I will go public, with everything, every receipt, every recording, every document in that folder and more. I'm not bluffing. I ended the message and pressed send. No dramatics, just clarity. The silence that followed was almost loud. 2 hours later, my phone pinged again. It was Branwen. I didn't know it was that bad. At first, I assumed she meant someone else. Then came another message. I'm sorry for clapping. I thought it was, I don't know, a show, like it wasn't real. Then another. Rosen said if I didn't support the vote, I was choosing sides, and Mom told me you'd already decided to leave. I felt cornered. I reread those lines 3 times. It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest thing I'd gotten in years that didn't come laced with an ask. If you want me to speak out, I will. I didn't reply. Not yet. I wasn't ready to trust her again. But something in me softened, just a notch. That night, I sat at my kitchen table alone, with nothing but my breath and the ticking of the thermostat. My hands shook, not from fear, from release, from the relief of having finally spoken, of finally being heard. I whispered it to the quiet, just to hear it out loud. Maybe I was never the quiet one. Maybe they just never listened. The next morning, I woke to silence, but it felt different. Emptier, not heavier. I moved on instinct, boxing up the pieces of a life I no longer owed anyone. There wasn't a plan, just momentum. Like once the words had left my mouth, everything else had to follow. The last box landed with a dull thud near the coat closet. I didn't bother labeling anything anymore. Just shuffled the essentials into drawers, closed the cabinets, and breathed in the blankness of the new apartment. No family portraits, no heirlooms, no framed cross-stitches saying, "Home is where the heart is." Just walls. Clean. Silent. I'd signed the lease 3 days after the blow-up and finalized every severance I could think of. New emergency contacts. No shared financial ties. Legal notices filed and documented. I changed passwords, moved accounts, even scrubbed Dad's name off the trust backups they thought I wouldn't catch. I'd missed nothing this time. On the kitchen counter, folded neatly, was an old red sweater, one Mom had given me during a particularly awkward Christmas years ago. It had gold-threaded snowflakes and a little stitched tag inside that read, "Love you always." That same year, she'd called me selfish for not co-signing a loan for Tolliver. I donated it to a shelter on my way to the grocery store. My phone buzzed. I opened the family thread one last time and typed, "My number stays the same, but you'll never reach who I used to be." Then I blocked them all. Every last one. I didn't expect silence to feel like safety, but it did. For 3 days, nothing came. Then the messages started again, but this time from new numbers. The first was a photo. Their living room. The usual tree. Same placement. But there was a gaping hole where presents used to be stacked. "It doesn't feel the same without you. Neva cried all night," Senna wrote. 10 minutes later, another one. "We're behind on the mortgage. You don't care anymore, do you?" Rosin. Then Tolliver of all people. "We all said things we regret. But you went nuclear. Why would you do this to your own family?" None of them said sorry. None of them asked how I was doing. They just pointed fingers, draped in concern, as if their discomfort was my crime. I stood at my new kitchen window, the city lights dimming behind mountain fog, and let the texts pile up like junk mail I'd never open. Then I poured a glass of wine. No holiday glassware this time, just a clean tumbler, and stepped out onto the balcony. The cold didn't bother me tonight. No music played, no messages popped in. And for once, no voice inside me asked if I'd gone too far. They didn't want me healed. They wanted me manageable. And I finally understood the difference. A few nights later, the cold started to feel familiar, almost welcome. I sat on the balcony longer than usual, watching the lights from the neighboring building flicker on and off. Somewhere, a dog barked twice, and then nothing. I liked that kind of quiet, the kind where no one needed anything from me. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Lila Harmon. We hadn't spoken in over 10 years. College friends turned Facebook background noise. "Hey, sorry to ask, but are you okay? I heard you were going through something. Rosen messaged me. Said you might be in a dark place. Wanted to make sure you're safe." I didn't respond right away. I stared at the screen until it dimmed and locked. So this was her new game. I opened Messenger. Another one. And another. People I hadn't talked to in ages, some from high school, others from a job I'd left long ago, all with eerily similar messages. She said you've been isolating, that you might be overwhelmed. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. It's okay to not be okay. Each one came with a sickly sweet tone, wrapped in concern, but dipped in judgment. This wasn't worry. This was a campaign. A few hours later, the smoke turned to fire. A vague post went up on Facebook, written by a woman named Andrea, someone I'd worked with years ago on a nonprofit project, now a casual acquaintance at best. We need to talk more about mental health, especially when people lash out, cut off their families, and claim victimhood while causing chaos. It didn't name me. It didn't have to. 3 comments down, a mutual friend tagged my name. Then someone else dropped a screenshot. An out-of-context text I'd sent Senna months ago. I'm not sure I can keep doing this with them. It's exhausting. That one word, exhausting, was all they needed to spin a new story. That I was unstable, emotionally fragile, dangerous. The whispers came next, in direct messages, in subposts, in the language of polite cruelty. She used to be so sweet, now she's cold. It's the holidays. Who cuts off their family at Christmas? Maybe she needs help. Then, a comment from Aunt Faye, who hadn't spoken to me since I was a teenager. We should all just pray for her. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I opened my laptop instead and started drafting a public response. Something sharp, articulate, laced with proof. But halfway through, I stopped typing. What was the point? They weren't looking for answers. They were just looking for control. So I called my lawyer. By the end of the day, Rosen received a formal cease and desist notice. Attached were screenshots, message logs, and a warning that any further defamation would be met with legal consequences. No more phone calls, no more folder drops. This time, I spoke in their language. That night, as the final email was sent, I whispered to myself, "You're not winning. You're gasping." And the silence that followed? It told me she heard. The silence didn't last long. 2 days after I sent the cease and desist, there was a knock at my door. 3 sharp raps, followed by nothing. I wasn't expecting anyone. I checked the peephole, heart tightening. It was Branwen. She stood there with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder and a tote that looked like it had been hastily packed. Her face was blotchy, eyes swollen, mascara smudged. No smile, just exhaustion. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," she said as I opened the door. I stepped aside without asking. She walked in slowly, like her limbs were heavy. I didn't speak, not yet. I just waited. She stood in the middle of my living room for a moment, then finally whispered, "I can't stay with them anymore. It's poisoned, all of it." I nodded once, then locked the door behind her. We sat down side by side on the couch, like old friends who forgot how to start over. It was a long time before she spoke again. "I should have said something sooner," Branwen murmured. "But after I messaged you, Rosen found out." I looked at her, my chest tightening. "She cornered me in the kitchen," she continued, her voice shaking. "Said if I ever contacted you again, she'd cut me off completely. Told me I was choosing a traitor. Then Mom chimed in. Said loyalty meant silence." Branwen paused, eyes glassy. I don't think I ever realized how deep it went. The control. The fear. "Yeah," I said softly. "It's easy not to see it until you're the target." She looked at me then. Really looked. "Kale left. He's staying at a friend's place. He told me Rosen tried to push him to write a statement about your mental instability. He refused." My throat burned. Branwen reached into her bag and handed me a folded piece of paper. A printed email. A full thread of messages. From Senna. From Rosen. Each one nastier than the last. Gaslighting, threats, manipulation. "You were right," she said. "About everything. And I'm done pretending too." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear those words until they left her lips. Later that night, another message came in from Rosen. You turned her against us, just like you poisoned everything. I didn't hesitate. You did that all by yourself. Then I blocked her, phone, email, every platform. I opened a document I'd been sitting on for weeks, a formal affidavit in support of Cale's divorce filing. I signed it, scanned it, sent it to his lawyer. Done. Branwen and I sat on the balcony that evening, the sky bruised with January cold. I brought her a blanket. She didn't thank me with words, just tucked it around herself and leaned back in the chair beside mine. We didn't talk. We didn't need to, because for the first time, the silence between us didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like peace. You're safe here, I said after a while. For real this time. She nodded, exhaling slow. And I realized quietly that maybe I was safe too. 2 weeks later, I found the letter in my mailbox, tucked between a utilities bill and a coupon booklet. No return address, just my name, handwritten in a familiar, tilted script that stopped me cold. I stood there on the steps outside my building, fingers tightening around the envelope. My first instinct was to toss it. Trash can was only 6 steps away. But something in me said, read it, not for them, for me. I walked upstairs, placed it on the counter, stared at it for an hour while the tea water cooled. Then I sat, opened the flap carefully, and unfolded the first page. We miss you, every day. No apology, no admission, just that line, scripted in my mother's loopy cursive. Page 2. Your father hasn't been well. His breathing's gotten worse. And Neva, she keeps asking when you're coming back. She drew you a picture. A pang, not a sharp one, just the kind that brushes against old bruises. Then the third page. We might lose the house. The mortgage is too far behind. We just need a little help. After that, we'll never ask again. Please, Alvain. That line, we'll never ask again, was underlined twice. I read all 3 pages once more. Then I folded them up, stood, and carried the letter outside. On the balcony, I pulled out the ceramic bowl I used to keep succulents in, set the letter inside, lit a match. The paper curled fast, black edges folding in on themselves, ink bleeding into orange flame. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel sad. I watched the smoke rise, soft and thin, vanishing into the sky, and whispered, I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done. There was something final in that moment. Not like slamming a door, more like taking the key off your ring and tossing it into a river. Later that night, I found an old emergency contact form I'd left half-filled in a drawer. I pulled it out, crossed off every old name, wrote in my own, me, finally, me. A few days after that, Branwen asked me if I could walk Neva to school. She had a shift and didn't want to leave her daughter with a sitter. I agreed without thinking. It wasn't an obligation, it was a choice. Neva held my hand the whole walk, skipping every third step. When we got to the gate, she looked up at me with that soft, curious stare only kids can manage. Will I see you at my birthday? She asked. I smiled, crouching down so we were eye level. Only if I'm invited. She nodded, then ran toward her class. I stood there for a minute, just watching her disappear into a crowd of color and chatter. When I turned to head home, the clouds were finally breaking, sunlight threading through the gray, slow, and golden. And for once, the end didn't feel like a collapse. It felt like a clearing. Maybe you've been the one keeping it all together. Maybe you've stayed silent to keep the peace, until you realized the silence was costing you your peace. For years, I thought love meant sacrifice. That being the strong one meant absorbing every blow, cleaning up every mess, carrying the weight without ever asking for help. But here's what I learned. Being strong isn't about how much you can endure. It's about knowing when enough is enough. It's about choosing yourself, without apology. Sometimes family won't understand your boundaries, because they were the ones who benefited from you not having any. And when you finally draw that line, they'll call it betrayal. But it's not. It's healing. I don't share this story to be dramatic. I share it for anyone who's ever felt guilty for walking away, for saying no, for protecting their peace. You are not selfish for outgrowing dysfunction. You are not heartless for demanding respect. And you are not alone. So, let me ask you, have you ever had to choose between peace and people? Between protecting your boundaries and preserving a relationship? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Just type 1 if this story hit home, or let me know what city or state you're watching from. I read every comment, seriously. And if this video gave you something to think about, maybe strength, maybe a little clarity, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. Because trust me, you're not the only one rebuilding, and you deserve to write your next chapter your way. Hello? My name is Peyton, and I was called a threat by my own brother, in open court. Just seconds after he slapped me across the face. They cuffed my hands like I was dangerous. They watched like they agreed. But the truth, I was the one investigating him. For 6 months. The worst part wasn't the slap. It was how no one stood up. Not my father, not my cousins, not even the woman who once called me her daughter. They all watched. They all stayed silent. But what if the silence was never just apathy? What if it was planned? What if they needed me to be invisible for everything they built to survive? The second he said my name, the air inside the courtroom shifted. So sudden, so sharp, you could almost hear it cut across the ceiling tiles. Ms. Quinn, representing CIA Oversight Division? The room didn't gasp. No one screamed. But every neck turned, every head tilted, every breath held. And for once, no one looked at Marshall. They looked at me. I didn't confirm it. I didn't nod or deny. I let the words hang there, bare and uncomfortable, like truth often is. My lips still throbbed from where he hit me. Blood had dried along the corner of my mouth, but I hadn't wiped it off. Let them see. Let them remember what silence looked like, what injustice left behind. Marshall's jaw twitched. He looked at the judge like the man had spoken in tongues. "She's lying," he said, too fast, too flat. "She's not with them. She's here on trial for obstruction." The judge didn't blink. "That'll be determined in due time." That's when they moved. 2 bailiffs, one on either side of me. Not rough, not aggressive, just routine. One reached for my wrist, as if somehow this was standard procedure. The other took my bag. "You're not authorized to search that," I said. "Standard procedure for flagged individuals," Marshall muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. He knew what he was doing. Strip me bare in public. Not with a weapon, but with a label. Threat. Unstable. Dangerous. My fingers tightened into a fist, still cuffed. They dumped my belongings across the table. Pens, a granola bar, a picture, creased down the middle, of me at 16 standing beside my mother. It slid to the floor. The bailiff didn't pick it up. Marshall stepped on it. Not a stomp, just walked over it. Deliberate, familiar. The kind of cruelty that doesn't scream. It whispers, "You don't matter." No one said a word. The judge didn't stop it. My court-appointed attorney gave a half-hearted, "Your Honor," that trailed off before it reached its point. I sat still, breathing in the fluorescent hum and recycled air. The room smelled like mold and old paper. That's when I saw him. Lorcan, back row, still, silent. He didn't look surprised. He didn't move. He just sat there, watching everything unfold like a man who'd seen this play before and hated how familiar it felt. I bent down and gathered the photo myself, brushed the dirt from it, folded it back into my bag without a word. The cuffs didn't make it easy, but I'd learned how to work around restraints a long time ago. People think silence is weakness, but silence can be armor. When I straightened, the judge turned back to me. "Do you have anything to say, Ms. Quinn?" I looked around the room, the clerk avoiding eye contact, the bailiffs returning to their posts, Marshall still watching me like he was waiting for me to crack. I said, "Only if you're all listening." He raised a brow. "Proceed." I was brought here under false pretenses, I began, framed for interfering with an investigation that didn't exist, branded a threat because I observed, not because I acted. My brother, I turned just slightly toward Marshall, lied. He laughed. One of those short, scoffing sounds people make when they know something's slipping. You're really going to do this here? I'm not doing anything, Marshall. I'm just not hiding anymore. He leaned forward. You know what this makes you look like? Yes, I said. And you know what it makes you look like? The judge slammed his gavel once. Enough. Mr. Creed, control yourself. Marshall didn't move. His eyes were locked on me now, not cold, but calculating, like he'd misjudged a variable and couldn't figure out which. I sat back down. My wrists still ached. My lips still stung, but I wasn't small anymore. The courtroom returned to its rhythm. Motions, paperwork, the scraping of chairs and the clack of shoes on tile. But something had shifted. They didn't see me as the problem anymore. They saw me. Only if you're all listening. I let the words hang there for a second longer than necessary. The silence that followed wasn't the kind that asks for attention. It demanded it. The judge didn't nod, didn't lean forward. He simply raised his brow and said, "Proceed." I didn't, not yet. Instead, I exhaled slowly and glanced toward the gallery, scanning the familiar and unfamiliar faces. No one moved. No one blinked. If I was waiting for someone to rise, to protest the circus unraveling around me, I'd be waiting a long time. Marshall cleared his throat behind me, loud enough for it to register as a challenge. That badge don't excuse what she's done, he muttered toward the judge. He always knew how to slide a blade with a smile, how to turn accusation into authority. The judge didn't address him. He looked at the bailiff, gave a small nod, and just like that, they came for my bag. No explanation, no legal basis, just motion wrapped in protocol. One grabbed it from the table where it had been tossed. The other stood beside me as if I was going to explode. Is this really necessary? My court-appointed lawyer asked, with all the fire of a wet sponge. Marshall responded for them. We've had reason to believe she's carrying unauthorized surveillance gear. That was rich. The bailiff unzipped the front pocket first, dumping out a notebook, 2 pens, and a sealed sandwich wrapped in foil. It hit the floor with a muted plop. No one picked it up. The larger compartment came next. Papers, receipts, a USB drive still in its cap. Nothing fancy, nothing weaponized. And then the photo. It fluttered out like a feather, landing just beside Marshall's boot. It was old, faded from years at the bottom of a drawer. Me and my mother, I must have been 16. We were standing in front of our old porch, smiling with our eyes, not our mouths. Marshall looked down at it. Then, deliberately, he stepped forward. And stepped on it. Not with force, not with flair. Just wait. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just watched his boot press into the only copy I had of the last day she told me she was proud. I bent forward to retrieve it myself. My wrists were still cuffed, but I managed. My fingers were slow, careful. I wiped the corner of the photo with my sleeve, folded it, and tucked it back into my bag. The room remained still, not frozen out of fear, but out of indifference. And that, I think, was worse. I glanced toward Lorcan. Back row, right side. He looked like he wanted to say something. His lips parted slightly. But instead, he looked down at his shoes. He used to tell me silence was strength. I used to believe him. Marshall leaned toward the bailiff. Anything else? Nope, the man replied. My attorney tried again. Judge, this search wasn't warranted, and she's still cuffed. She assaulted a fellow officer. Marshall cut in, loud enough for the room. No, I said, finally speaking with weight. I didn't assault anyone. I filmed you pushing an elderly man to the ground, and that's why I'm here. A few heads in the gallery shifted. Marshall's face hardened, but his mouth didn't move. That told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't expected me to say it aloud. He hadn't expected me to speak at all. The judge sighed and turned to me. You may remain seated. This court will resume with statements from Officer Creed. Of course, Marshall said smoothly, slipping back into his polished tone. We have reason to believe, Miss Quinn. I tuned him out. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew how this part went. I'd heard it all before. In every family dinner I wasn't invited to. In every graduation photo I was cropped out of. In every "you're too sensitive" and "don't make this about you." This wasn't about one slap. This was about years of being framed as the problem. The foil-wrapped sandwich still lay on the floor. A tiny absurdity in a room filled with contradictions. I reached down, picked it up, and placed it back in my bag, as if reclaiming it meant something. And maybe it did. Maybe it meant I still had control over what stayed with me. The judge glanced toward me again. Ms. Quinn, do you wish to provide your side? I looked at the room, looked at my brother, looked at the space where family used to sit with pride. Yes, I said, because sometimes the only way to break silence is to fill it with the truth. Lorcan blinked at me, once, and I knew he remembered too. That folder in his lap wasn't just paper, it was a ticking thing, a piece of history I hadn't touched in over a decade, a piece that was mine until someone decided it wasn't. I leaned back in my seat, letting my wrists rest in the cuffs. The edges of the metal had started to leave impressions on my skin, like they were trying to etch themselves into my memory. I kept my eyes on that folder, steady. I didn't dare look at Marshall, not yet. If I looked at him, I'd speak. And right now, silence was my scalpel. The judge cleared his throat. Officer Creed, please proceed with your account. Marshall didn't hesitate. Your Honor, the defendant, Ms. Quinn, interfered with an ongoing investigation, refused to comply with orders, and recorded classified material at a restricted scene. She displayed erratic behavior and showed intent to escalate. He said it with the kind of certainty only liars develop. Smooth, practiced, unshakable. I closed my eyes. And I was 22 again. I'd just gotten out of a second-round interview with a joint intelligence unit. Cross-departmental, high-level, nothing like the quiet admin work I was doing at the time. They called me a standout candidate, said they liked my eye for patterns, my ability to disappear in plain sight. I never told anyone. Not at first. When the letter came, I opened it on my porch. My mother was inside, stirring soup with one hand and holding a cordless phone to her ear with the other. I read the acceptance twice before I could breathe again. That training meant escape. It meant validation. It meant someone saw me. I told Marshall a week later. He didn't say much, just nodded. Said something about how those programs chew people up. Then he offered to help me prep for the background check. Said he had experience. It wasn't until 2 months later that I learned I'd been disqualified. A family incident, they said. A file flagged by local law enforcement. I never saw the details. No one returned my calls. I didn't ask questions. I just folded in on myself and went back to the desk job. It took years to piece together what had happened. An old friend of mine from the program reached out one night, asking why I never showed. Your brother spoke highly of you, he said. Didn't realize you two were so close. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. A month after that call, I found the certificate, hidden in a drawer at my parents' house, buried under church newsletters and expired coupons. It had my name scratched out in pen. Marshall's name was typed over it. He'd taken everything, not just the opportunity, the credit, the identity, the version of me that might have been more than tolerated, the version that would have been undeniable. I confronted my mother once, showed her the certificate. She looked at it for a long while. Then, without meeting my eyes, she said, he had to do what he thought was best for his future. That was the last time we talked about it. I didn't bring it up again, and she never asked why I moved out a week later. Back in the courtroom, Marshall was still talking, still rewriting the truth with that calm, clipped tone of his. He's always had that voice, I thought, the kind that makes lies sound like instructions. I adjusted the sleeve of my blouse, just slightly. The watch underneath pulsed once, a gentle rhythm against my skin. A reminder. A tether. Marshall was laying out my pattern of escalation, calling my actions calculated disobedience. I couldn't help but smirk. The irony almost made me laugh. He didn't realize how right he was. I let my eyes drift again to Lorcan. He hadn't opened the folder yet. He didn't need to. He just kept his hand on it, thumb tapping the edge in a pattern only I seemed to recognize. Slow, deliberate, familiar. Like the way he used to knock on my door when dinner was ready, back when I still lived under their roof. I don't think he meant to do it, but it grounded me. I didn't feel angry. Not anymore. I felt surgical. Marshall finished speaking. The judge made a note. My lawyer shifted beside me, finally sensing the turn in the air. And I realized something then. This wasn't just about proving him wrong. This was about rewriting the part of the story I'd let him author for too long. Lorcan's lips parted, but no words came. His hand stayed flat on that manila folder, like it weighed more than paper ever should. I didn't move either. A conversation had already happened between us, wordless but sharp. Just then, my watch buzzed twice, quick, soft pulses. I shifted my wrist slightly, angling the screen beneath the table where no one else could see. A new message. I tapped to open the secured app buried beneath layers of encryption, hidden in plain sight beneath a calorie tracker. The screen lit up with a thread of screenshots. Group chat. Timestamps from the past week. Names I knew. Marshall. Aunt Cheryl. Cousin Nina. Even Lorraine, who once braided my hair while telling me I was her favorite. My name was everywhere, none of it kind. Liability. Always playing the victim. She's probably taping this right now, paranoid nutcase. Marshall should have cut her off years ago. Can't fix broken. That last one was from Lorraine. I didn't blink, didn't let the burn reach my face, but inside, something shifted. Not snapped, not shattered, settled. They weren't confused. They weren't misled. They were unified, and they'd been practicing this silence for years. I let the screen dim, then flicked my thumb across the watch's bezel, 3 soft turns counterclockwise. The signal activated beneath the surface, unseen, just enough to trigger the silent protocol we'd rehearsed only in theory. Peyton Quinn, liability. Peyton Quinn, overreacting. Peyton Quinn, listening. I looked up at Marshall, who was still basking in the sound of his own voice, spinning a tale to the judge like he was giving a Sunday sermon. My lawyer leaned in. "You've got a secure call. Should I decline?" I shook my head. He passed me the earpiece under the table, where no one else could see. I slipped it in, adjusted my hair, and answered with a tap. The voice that came through wasn't familiar, but the tone was. "You should be careful what you do next," it said. Male, neutral, too calm to be random. "Who is this?" "You've stirred things that don't like being seen. He's not alone, you know that." "And you're warning me out of concern?" I asked flatly. "No," the voice replied. "Out of pity. You're alone in that room, and they're going to bury you." He hung up before I could respond. The line dropped to static, then silence. For a second, I stared past the courtroom, into nothing, and suddenly, I wasn't 34 years old in federal cuffs. I was 13 again. It was my cousin's birthday. Everyone wore matching shirts. The banner read, "Happy Family," painted in pink glitter letters. My name wasn't on the cake. I hadn't even been in the group text to plan it. I sat at the very end of the table, a folding chair just a little shorter than the rest, paper plate in my lap, plastic fork. No one spoke to me, not even when I dropped my cup of juice on my lap and whispered for a napkin. They didn't just overlook me, they coordinated it. That memory never really went away. It just got layered beneath louder ones. But today, That silence was back. And this time, I was ready for it. Back in the courtroom, Marshall was talking about patterns of behavior. Of course he was. He always needed a script to play hero. I watched the judge nod along, not convinced, but unmoved, same as always. And the gallery? Quiet as a funeral, until Lorcan moved again. He uncrossed his legs, sat upright, placed the folder on his lap, and tapped his finger once, twice on the seal. I straightened in my seat, wrists stiff, tilted my head just a little, not asking, just watching. They had expected me to be rattled, maybe even outraged. What they didn't expect, what they never learned to read, was the quiet between my choices, the space where the rage settled into shape. I glanced down, checked the watch, still transmitting. Good. I adjusted my posture, leaned slightly toward Riley, and said in a voice too soft for anyone else to hear, "It's time." He didn't respond with words, just nodded once, then reached down and pulled the flash drive from his inside pocket. In my peripheral, Marshall froze, because maybe, just maybe, he remembered what I'd always been good at. Not yelling, just waiting. He didn't look up right away, just stared at the screen, thumb frozen mid-scroll. Marshall's mouth pressed into that familiar, disapproving line he used when trying to decide whether to explode or play it cool. He was calculating, running options through his head, testing which narrative might survive what he'd just read. I watched him from across the room, not saying a word. I didn't need to. The email had already spoken for me. It had gone out the moment Lorcan's folder changed hands. Riley had triggered it with a remote tap, same moment he slipped the flash drive into his pocket. Simple, clean, automatic. The contents, scanned documents, time-stamped messages, agency correspondence, had all been packaged into a neat little file titled QuinnOversight.pdf. That title alone was enough to make Marshall nervous. But it wasn't the name that had him sweating. It was the evidence he never thought would surface again. The judge adjusted his glasses, clearly annoyed by the distraction. "Is there a problem, Sergeant Creed?" Marshall cleared his throat. "Just a technical issue." "You're not on the stand anymore," the judge reminded him. "If you've finished your testimony, we'll proceed." Riley stood, calm as ever. "Your Honor, we've just submitted new material to the court email, as well as to opposing counsel. We request a 10-minute recess to review and prepare a formal response." The judge didn't even look at the screen. "Motion denied. We'll continue." "Of course." Marshall gave a little smirk, as if to say, "See? Still got it." I reached down slowly and brushed my fingers along the cuff of my shirt, revealing the top edge of my matte black watch. The light had already turned green. Transmission in progress. No one saw it but me. That was the point. The documents weren't just proof of my enrollment in the cross-agency program Marshall had stolen. They included an internal note, dated 14 months ago, the day I first received the anonymous tip. A local officer with history had falsified federal placement credentials using access granted through a sibling connection. That sibling was me. At the time, I didn't know whether it was rumor or setup, but I flagged it anyway, quietly, officially. I wasn't looking for justice, not then. I just wanted to stop being the invisible one. But what I found pulled me right back in. It wasn't just the training program. He'd used my name, my background, and even sections of my security clearance form, some of it word for word, to advance himself while keeping me in the dirt. The man who called me unstable and a threat had spent years climbing ladders built on my shoulders. I rotated the bezel of my watch once. A small click sounded in my earpiece. Riley's cue. He stood again, gently clearing his throat. Per the court's acknowledgement, the defense would like to read a single paragraph from the newly submitted material. The judge leaned back with a sigh. "Proceed." Riley unfolded a printed page and read, "This letter certifies that Peyton Quinn was accepted into the Federal Cross-Agency Tactical Training Initiative in 2014, under the authorization of the Joint Committee Review Board. Any claims to the contrary are in direct violation of the applicant's federal protections under the Security Access Integrity Act. Marshall shifted. Riley continued, "Attached are comparative applications submitted under the name Marshall Creed, using phrases and language identical to Peyton Quinn's personal statements, flagged and duplicated in 3 separate forms." Now the room changed. It wasn't loud, it was slower, like wind changing direction. A few eyes turned toward Marshall. One of the assistant DAs picked up her tablet and began scrolling. I kept my voice steady. "This wasn't retaliation." Marshall snapped his head toward me. "This wasn't revenge," I continued. "It was a response. You took my name, my place, my future." He opened his mouth, too fast. "You don't know what you're talking about." I looked right at him. "Don't I?" He stood. Not officially, just that casual rise that men use when they're trying to look tall without getting caught standing too fast. "I worked for everything I have." "No," I said. "You stole what I stopped fighting for." Riley raised a hand gently. "Ms. Quinn, please direct all remarks to the bench." The judge didn't intervene. Not yet. Marshall laughed, but it came out flat. "This doesn't change anything." "It already did," I said. The bailiff stepped closer, not because of anything said, but because they'd seen enough to feel the shift in balance. People react to tone before content. And my tone? It was no longer defensive. It was deliberate. Marshall sat down again, slower this time. The judge finally spoke. "We'll recess briefly to allow time to review the submitted documents." Everyone stood. Marshall didn't. He was staring at his phone again. The bailiff leaned toward him. "You might want to check your email, sir." Marshall did, and when he read what he found, he didn't smirk. He clenched his jaw. The bailiff's body shifted just enough to block Marshall's path. No raised voice, no hand on a weapon, just quiet authority, the kind that's not about volume, it's about weight. Marshall froze mid-step, eyes flicking up from the phone in his hand to the man in front of him, then to me. I didn't move. Neither did the courtroom. I could see him debating whether to shove past the bailiff and risk it all, or pretend like he'd only meant to stretch his legs. He went with the second option, because that's who Marshall is. Always pushing just far enough that it hurts, never far enough that it costs him. He cleared his throat, took a step back, and returned to his seat. The leather chair groaned under him, like it too was tired of holding his weight. I stood up without asking. The court assistant unlocked the cuffs around my wrists with a quiet click, stepping back, as if I might need the space. I didn't thank her. I didn't say a word. Instead, I picked up the folder Riley had placed on the table and walked toward the judge. Step by step, with the calm of someone who knew they weren't being dramatic. They were being deliberate. The judge looked up, mildly surprised I was moving on my own. "I believe this belongs in your hands now," I said. My voice didn't waver. I placed the folder on his bench and returned to my seat. No one stopped me. No one had to anymore. Back at the defense table, I glanced at Riley. He nodded subtly, affirming that the flash drive's contents were already secured and transmitted. Marshall, meanwhile, was flipping through his phone like he could undo whatever had just landed in his inbox. But nothing on that screen was going to save him now. The folder I'd just handed the judge contained more than training records or duplicated essays. It had the application. Mine. Handwritten in my penmanship, dated, time-stamped, sealed with a digital trail stretching back to a month before Marshall ever touched it. It was the original, not a copy, a printed, notarized scan from the government archives, and it wasn't alone. Attached was a second document, a signed sworn affidavit from the agency's internal review officer. That signature was going to hurt more than anything I could say aloud. "Your Honor," Riley stood again, this time with more weight behind him. "We would like the court to consider this in context of not just Ms. Quinn's status, but the origin and integrity of the claims made against her. The accusations are not only retaliatory, they're built upon falsified credentials and deliberate obfuscation by a family member." Marshall shot up. This is fabricated. The judge raised a hand to stop him. You'll have a chance to respond, Officer Creed. Marshall didn't sit. You're taking her word over mine? I've served this community for 20 years. Riley calmly spoke again. And we're not questioning your years of service, sir. We're presenting evidence that you leveraged familial trust and access to remove someone from a federally approved career path, without consent, without merit. Marshall finally turned toward me. You always had to make everything about you. I didn't blink. You made me a ghost in my own life. I'm just reminding everyone I exist. The judge sat with the documents for a few seconds, flipping through each page slowly. Not skimming, reading. It was the first time since this entire thing started that someone in power was holding something with my name on it, and not tossing it aside. My mind drifted back 6 months. I was sitting in a basement office under fluorescent lights that made everyone look a little dead. An alert had popped up on my secure network. A civilian complaint flagged as pattern escalation. The officer named? Marshall Creed. I hadn't said a word then, not even to Riley. I simply opened a new file and labeled it Creed Shadow Inquiry. It started with misconduct claims. Then came disciplinary inconsistencies, transfers approved without interviews, testimonials buried without follow-up. I had enough to build a case long before the slap in this courtroom, but I wasn't after a conviction. I was after confirmation. I wasn't the crazy sister. I was the one who'd stayed silent long enough to see the whole picture. Back in the courtroom, the judge looked up. We will take a recess to review these materials further. Counsel, you may remain. As the judge exited, Riley whispered, You good? I nodded. This wasn't retaliation. Riley looked at me sideways. No? It was containment, I said. And before Marshall could rise again, the bailiff stepped forward, blocking him. No, it's just finally started. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The words landed like a flat stone on still water, quiet but impossible to ignore. Marshall slowed as he passed, flanked now by 2 court officers, their presence no longer symbolic but procedural. He didn't look back at me, didn't dare. Judge Carlton had barely announced the recess before Riley moved. With a nod to the clerk, he stepped over to the AV cart, tapped the screen, and cued the video. He didn't need permission. The file had already been admitted, sealed, time-stamped, and verified. The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly. No fanfare, just the flicker of a paused frame on the wall-mounted monitor. Grainy, time-stamped, wide angle. The camera was positioned high, likely from a business security feed. The audio was distant, but intact. And there he was. Marshall, in full uniform, arms squared, voice raised, posture tight with performance. Across from him, an older black man, gray hair, slight limp, holding a folded newspaper, and nothing else. No threat, no aggression. The video rolled. Marshall didn't ask questions. He barked orders, pointed aggressively. The man tried to explain something, couldn't be heard clearly, but his hands stayed down the whole time. Then Marshall shoved him, hard. The man stumbled back, almost into traffic. A passerby caught him before he fell. In the courtroom, a few people gasped, not loud, but enough. The kind of sound people make when they realize they've been fooled. The clip ended there. No commentary, no replay, just silence. Riley stepped back, didn't say a word. The judge looked up from his notes, and then, unexpectedly, someone else stood. A uniformed officer, sitting on the far left of the gallery. I recognized him immediately, Detective Henry Locke. Marshall's partner for more than a decade. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I filed the original report, he said, voice hoarse but steady. It was buried, replaced with a different version. My version never saw light. The room went still again. Marshall hadn't turned around, hadn't looked at the screen, but now he did. What the hell are you doing? He asked, voice low and thick. Locke didn't blink. Telling the truth. Something I should have done a long time ago. Judge Carlton leaned forward, folding his hands. Detective Locke, can you verify the footage? I can. I was there, and I was told to let it go. Marshall erupted. You coward! You wait until now? He snapped, standing abruptly, pointing toward Locke. You're gonna throw away everything we built because of her? He jabbed his finger in my direction. I stayed seated. You think this makes you righteous? He continued, voice rising. You were nothing without me. I turned to Riley, leaned in close. This isn't the fall, it's just the stumble. He glanced at me, then back at Marshall. He's unraveling. Judge Carlton pounded the gavel once. Sergeant Creed, control yourself. You're still under oath in these proceedings. Marshall opened his mouth again, then thought better of it. He sat, but not with grace. He dropped into the chair like gravity had finally caught up with him. The courtroom murmured, soft but growing. Whispers passed like static. Eyes shifted. The air, moments ago tense with uncertainty, now buzzed with clarity. I didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't look around for affirmation. I just watched. I didn't come for applause, I thought. I came for the truth to walk by itself. And for the first time all day, it was walking tall. The judge called a recess. Court officers moved to escort Marshall out. Not arrested, not yet, but monitored. They knew what it meant to walk with a man like him now. Knew how close his name sat to the edge of a scandal. He passed me again, a step slower. This isn't over, he hissed. I didn't blink. No, I said softly. It's just finally started. The hallway outside the courtroom echoed with the sound of heels, whispered questions, and camera shutters. I didn't pause to answer any of them. I kept walking, not fast, not slow, just steady. The badge in my hand was small, but the message it carried had been building for years. Back inside, the court reconvened before the hour was up. When I re-entered, no one looked at me the same. Marshall's seat was now flanked by federal officers. He wasn't cuffed, not yet. But he wasn't moving either. His face, once full of practiced certainty, was pale. Not fear. Something worse, realization. I stepped up to the front without prompting. No lawyer introduced me. No gavel summoned silence. I was already being heard. I pulled a slim black case from my bag and opened it. No theatrics, no pause for effect. I just turned it so the judge could see the contents. Central Intelligence Agency, Oversight and Internal Accountability. Below that, the authorization letter with 3 separate seals. Ms. Quinn, Judge Carlton said carefully, are you prepared to present your findings? I didn't come here to win, I said. I came to reveal. With Riley's help, I handed the judge a stack of sealed documents, each one marked with a different code, each one authenticated and already cleared for review under emergency disclosure. 3 sealed warrants, 2 from Justice, 1 from Oversight itself. Inside them, names, dates, timelines, chain of command violations, suppression of internal complaints, evidence mishandled or buried. I wasn't just accusing Marshall anymore. I was exposing a network built on silence and favor swapping, where bad behavior wasn't punished. It was rewarded, as long as you knew how to smile at the right person. Marshall didn't say a word. Not anymore. Not with the agents behind him already checking their watches. The judge read through the first file for several long seconds before passing it to the clerk. Then came the shift. 2 people in the gallery stood. Not attorneys, not local deputies. Washington. They didn't introduce themselves. They simply walked to Marshall and presented a folded document. He didn't even unfold it. He just looked at the header and sagged. You can't, he began, but the agent was already reading him his rights. He didn't resist, because what could he say? He had made his story airtight, but mine had been silent for so long, it had weight now. And truth, when backed by proof, doesn't need to yell. The courtroom didn't erupt, it exhaled. As they escorted Marshall toward the door, 2 more officers rose from the benches. They weren't there for show, They were there for cleanup. The woman beside the district attorney pulled out her phone. The judge raised a hand, and she put it down again. I turned toward the room. Not just the people on the record, but the ones who had watched all this happen. Some had chosen not to act. Others hadn't known how. Either way, they were part of it. I spoke clearly, evenly. The silence you all kept, I said, wasn't protection. It was participation. Nobody argued. I didn't need applause. I needed acknowledgement. That was enough. From the back row, Lorcan stood slowly, holding a folded letter in his hand. His voice was low, but the room leaned in to hear him. "It's from her," he said. He meant my mother. He unfolded it carefully. "Don't let them rename you. You already know who you are." My chest tightened. For a moment, I forgot where I was. It wasn't about courtrooms or clearances anymore. It was about history, mine, and all the parts of it I'd been forced to bury just to make others comfortable. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I saw a space where I had once been erased, now filled with quiet recognition. The session ended. The judge didn't call it a verdict. He didn't need to. Some truths don't require gavels. As I stepped outside, the flashes began. Cameras, reporters, microphones stretched toward me. "Ms. Quinn, what agency are you really with? Did you expect Marshall to be taken in today? Is this going to open other investigations?" I didn't answer. I didn't owe them anything. Instead, I lifted the badge in my hand. Not high, not triumphantly, just enough. Sometimes that's all it takes. And somewhere inside me, not loud, not fragile, a voice whispered, "Sometimes the only justice you get is the kind you make." When the cameras stopped flashing and the hallway thinned out, I stayed. The sidewalk outside the courthouse had turned quiet again, just another stretch of concrete in a city that barely remembered what happened an hour ago. People passed, some on phones, some holding coffee, some with children in tow. Life resumed, as if justice hadn't just been whispered instead of declared. I found a spot on the old stone steps, tucked my bag beside me, and just sat. The wind nudged the hem of my coat. I didn't cry. But the silence pressed in differently now, less like isolation, more like space I had finally earned. It was over, but nothing was restored. And that was the part no one ever prepared you for. I reached into my coat pocket and unfolded the letter. The creases had become soft from handling, corners curled, the ink faded slightly. It was my mother's handwriting. "You don't need their permission to exist," it said. "You don't need their forgiveness to move forward. Don't wait for their validation. You are already enough." I traced the last line with my thumb. She hadn't written my name. She hadn't said, "Love, Mom." Just left it unsigned, as if she knew the signature wasn't what mattered. I folded the paper again and placed it back in the envelope. Across the street, a mail truck idled. It reminded me of what I still had to do. I stood up, walked slowly toward my rental car, and slid into the driver's seat. The engine hummed to life. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't need a soundtrack. At the first mailbox, I dropped in an envelope addressed to my aunt, Lorraine. The second went to my cousin Nina. The third, to my father. Each letter was handwritten. No copies, no accusations, just the truth in my words. Not for argument, not for debate. Just clarity. I didn't expect responses. I didn't need them. The fourth letter I slipped under a nursing home window, taped it gently to the glass. The man behind the curtain stared blankly until his eyes caught the name in the corner. He didn't wave, but he didn't look away. Sometimes acknowledgement is quieter than apology. When the last letter was delivered, I headed home. It was dusk by then. Streetlights flickered on before the sun had fully dipped. Familiar shadows welcomed me at the apartment door. Inside, everything was where I left it. The couch still sagged slightly on one side. My kitchen smelled faintly of mint tea. The framed photo of my mother, taken long before her smile had to be earned, watched me from the bookshelf. I put the kettle on. No celebrations, no visitors, just the quiet company of my own breath and the dull hum of the fridge. I sat at the kitchen table, mug between my palms, the warmth grounding me. People think vindication feels like fireworks. It doesn't. It feels like air returning to a room that's been sealed shut too long. Winning doesn't always mean restoring. Sometimes it just means refusing to be erased. I took a sip of tea, glanced toward the fridge, and smiled for the first time all day. Taped there with a purple magnet was a piece of paper, crayon drawings, uneven lines. A stick figure woman with a cape and big hair. Next to her, a child with pigtails and a speech bubble. "You're my hero," it said, below the sketch, in uneven handwriting. "Don't be afraid, Auntie." It didn't have a return address, but I knew who sent it. And somehow, that was enough. Sometimes, the justice we wait for never arrives the way we imagine. It doesn't come with applause or closure, or everyone finally admitting they were wrong. Sometimes, it's simply the choice to stop waiting, and to speak your truth anyway. Have you ever been erased from your own story, only to find the courage to rewrite it? If this story moved you, or reminded you of something buried deep, tell us in the comments below. We're listening. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, human-centered stories like this. Because some truths deserve to be told out loud.